Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome and good morning. Thank you very much for staying here. Great to have you all here with us. We're going to be talking about the future of cities, and I'll introduce my panel first, and then I have a few questions for you, because I'd like to find out what you think. So firstly, sitting on my left is Andrew Boraine. Andrew Boraine is the Chief Executive Officer for the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership, and he's a Senior Non-Resident Fellow at the Brookings Institution Metro Program. Sitting next to him, we're really honoured to have the Honourable Kasim Reed, the Mayor of the City of Atlanta. Welcome, Mr. Mayor. Sitting next to him, Maria Ranka, the Chief Executive Officer of the Stockholm Chamber of Commerce. And sitting next to Maria, we have General Raymond Odierno, the former Chief of Staff of the US Army and a Senior Advisor for JPMorgan Chase & Co. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel. Let me say, as others have done during the course of the morning, a big thank you to the Brookings Institute and its Metropolitan Policy Program and JPMorgan Chase for the amazing partnership that has produced this fantastic Global Cities Initiative over the last 5 years. I'll be picking up on many of the things that Peter Scher said earlier today and the things that Amy Liu said during her brilliant presentation earlier as we have our conversation with our panelists. I'm also really honoured that the book that I've produced for the initiative was published today, and although the book is described as a short history, it does in the final chapter pick up on the themes that we're going to discuss with our panelists about the future challenges and the leadership that's facing our global cities as they move forward. Before I ask our panelists to start the questions, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and we're going to adopt what I would call an Australian system of voting. That means it's compulsory to participate in the polls. If you don't, you get fined. But we're not adopting the Russian system of voting, and that means you can only vote once. Okay? So, question number one. As we think about the next cycle, which will be the topic that we'll put to our distinguished panel, are the challenges facing our cities going to be greater, or are they going to be fewer? If you think they're going to be greater, please raise your hands. Thank you. If you think they're going to be fewer, please raise your hands. Okay, so lots of challenge and opportunity coming your way. We may put it that way. Second question, over that cycle, are our expectations of the problems that cities can address successfully, are our expectations going to rise, or are they going to fall? If you think our expectations will rise, please raise your hands. If you think our expectations will fall, please raise your hands. Okay, so we've got about a 90 to 10 there on the second vote. It was more or less 100 to 0 on the first vote. Third vote. Do you think that our cities are acquiring more of the capability that they need to address the future challenges, or do you think they're not acquiring that capability? If you think they are, please raise your hands. Okay, if you think they're not, please raise your hands. Okay, I would say, Mr. Mayor, that was a 45-55 vote, but you're better at counting votes than I am, I'm sure. So
I tell you what, you're scaring me so much, I think I need to go catch a flight home. I feel like I got something to do.
So basically, Mr. Mayor, we have an audience here that thinks the challenges are going to get greater. They think there are expectations of what cities can do are going to rise. But they think that the skills, the competencies, and the tools that the cities need are not going to get greater. So it's going to be a big leadership challenge thinking about the future of these cities, and that's what we're going to debate with our audience. Now, Andrew, if we may, we're going to start with you. You work in Cape Town, Johannesburg, many South African cities, and indeed you've worked all over the world. I know that you want to pick up on the theme of combining economic growth with economic inclusion. So tell us a little bit about how you see the public and private sector in Africa and in the other places where you work coming together to make sure that growth and inclusion are partners, not one without the other.
Thanks, Greg, and Amy, thanks to you and your team for the opportunity to be here. The sort of cities that I work in are characterized by, in a sense, fairly polarized situations. I mean, the new mayor of Johannesburg is the former head of the Free Market Foundation, but in his council he has Venezuelan-style populists who have a very different view of the economy. Now, how do you reconcile that? And it's not easy in cities where you have a conflicted history or a divided past. We've inherited this sort of racial, spatial, physical separation of our cities, huge degrees of inequality that persist. All our cities that we are dealing with in my neck of the woods, 25% structural unemployment, 35 to 40% for the youth. So how do we bring people together on the basis of a common agenda? And maybe it sounds a little bit extreme in the South African case and other African and other developing cities, but I do know that many cities around the world, even developed cities, are faced with the situation where some communities feel excluded. They are facing fairly rapid demographic changes through migration and immigration, and or economic and political power hasn't really been shared beyond a small elite. And this is why, for example, in Cape Town, in the Western Cape, which is the state or province surrounding Cape Town, we deliberately set up an economic development partnership, which is it's a sort of independent organization designed to achieve three things. How do we get people to a shared vision, where we can tell an authentic city story, which goes way beyond just a sort of investment marketing spiel for the economic department of the city. Secondly, how do we get people to not just a shared vision, but a common agenda? How do we differentiate between people's positions, which are often very polarizing, and people's interests, and the interests of communities, which can be brought together in a common interest, common agenda, despite differences? And thirdly, it's no use just sitting and talking, and dialogue is good, but how do we convert the dialogue that seeks to overcome the difference into joint action? Because how you build trust and confidence is not just by talking together, it's by working together. And how quickly one can convert the dialogue into actionable projects becomes the key test here. So how do we organize the common agenda? Well, we've certainly on the economic development side, city economic development strategy, on the basis of a balanced economic toolkit. Because traditionally there's a little bit of a dichotomy. You get the growth people working on productivity and competitiveness and business environment and the city story and promotion and branding. And then you get a whole other part of the city looking at community development, youth development, social inclusion and things like that, and never the twain shall meet. So I think the starting point is to have an equally balanced economic development toolkit. And the different tools, not all tools for competitiveness and productivity and investment deliver inclusivity and vice versa. But there are some examples, and I'll just give a couple of, just one or two. Up the coast from Cape Town, about 100 kilometers away, there's a deep water port called Saldanha, which is the focus of a massive national, provincial, and local government industrial strategy based on oil and gas. But it's totally obliterating the position of local business. And they're saying, well, where's the localization impact? It's missing us by. People are coming from all over the world to take part of the strategy. What about us? So we've, deliberately set up an enterprise and supplier development platform so that they can, part of the deal for a global investment project around oil and gas is localization of benefit. And so it's an inclusive and growth strategy together. The other example I would give is a spatial one. Middle of Cape Town, there's an area known as Philippi. It's 48 square kilometers, 250,000 of the poorest citizens, 57% of them live in conditions of informality. And so what we've been able to do is bring together a public and private investment alignment around transit-oriented development to improve mobility and access. So the economic people have to deal with space, which is not always easy, because economists and planners don't always get on. And then you throw in the transport engineers, and it becomes more complex. But through a deliberate partnership, it's about how do we include Philippi, one of the poorest parts of Cape Town, 250,000 people, in the economic growth strategy.
Great, Andrew, thank you very much indeed. So it's economic development as a form of conflict resolution, and you've described at least two mechanisms. I'm sure there are others: supply chain development as a form of localization, and a new approach to how space is managed and integrated to make sure that benefits come to places where there's need. Thank you very much. We'll come back to some other points in a few minutes. Mr. Mayor, if we may, one of the things that's been described this morning is the huge growth of global cities and how we're living in a more competitive world. So when you're pitching Atlanta to investors, what's the thing that you say that differentiates Atlanta? What's the unique pitch, and how do you find that's working in this crowded market?
Well, first, I smile. I'm just joking. No, seriously.
Pretty powerful.
What I say is that we have a set of fundamentals in Atlanta and the metropolitan region that are not easily replaceable in the United States. And so when you look at our fundamentals, our competitors can't replicate them easily. So we have the busiest passenger airport in the world. Last year we handled 101 million passengers. We have almost unmatched global connectivity. We're one of the 3 most connected cities globally in the world. So if you're interested in foreign direct investment, you're going to be able to come to Atlanta and get everywhere else in the United States. We're within 2 hours from Hartsville-Jackson of 80% of US GDP. And so it makes sense to be a launching point for your business. We also have a terrific market for you. We've got the 3rd largest concentration of Fortune 500 businesses in the United States. So we are a terrific market. We have the 9th largest metro with a GDP in excess of $305 billion last year. That was larger than 30 states in the United States of America. And really my job is to make sure that my region's economy is the dominant economy from the eastern border of Texas to the Atlantic Ocean, up to Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. And we really don't count Miami because it's 16 miles down a peninsula. We also got to have something to say about it. We also have one of the 4 fastest growing container ports in the United States in Savannah. So we have sea and ocean access. And you wrap that all in a bow by a community that has about 275,000 college students. The center of our city is literally surrounded by excellent universities. When the President of the United States wanted to talk about the best value in higher education, he had to get on a plane and fly and land at the campus of Georgia Tech. When the country was fighting the Ebola crisis, the President of the United States had to land in Atlanta and go to the Centers for Disease Control, which is right next to Emory University. Georgia State University is now the largest public college in the state of Georgia. It's nestled in the southeast corridors of our city. And if you care about diversity and inclusion, we have the Atlanta University Center, which is producing some of the most talented black people in the United States. And so if you're a business that wants a diverse workforce, you really do have it all right in the city of Atlanta. We also have some really interesting business sectors. Our hospitality sector gives working people and people who are striving an opportunity. We're one of the 5 most visited cities in the United States of America. And we have about 220,000 people working in our hospitality sector, which is a $10 to $12 billion sector for us. But we've also got interesting niches, like we're the 3rd leading city in America for motion picture and television content. That's now a $6 to $7 billion sector for us, employing 24,000 people. So we think all of those things are the reasons that the metropolitan Atlanta region dominates the southeastern part of the United States, and at the end of the day, that's my job. And then I conclude by saying this. Those really are our fundamentals, but what makes it unique is Southern hospitality isn't a slogan. It's actually real. And if you want to be in a city that actually welcomes people from wherever you are in the world, where people don't look at you funny if you have an Australian accent, or look at you funny if you're from Nigeria, or look at you funny if you're from the Middle East, or look at you funny if you're from Central or South America, being welcoming is a part of our DNA. And I think increasingly that is going to be a much more important factor in where people choose their businesses. And then I use a little bit of peer pressure. I say, all your friends are coming to Atlanta. Last week, Honeywell announced 850 jobs in Atlanta. Last month, GE Digital announced 250 jobs in Atlanta. Kaiser Permanente announced 900 jobs in Atlanta. Coca-Cola moved 2,000 jobs to the heart of the city. WorldPay moved 1,200 jobs to Atlanta. NCR is building a $250 million campus, moved 3,500 jobs to Atlanta. Yeah. And so I just tell them, in Atlanta, we understand how business works, and we know that you understand yes and no, but you hate maybe. So come to Atlanta.
Wow. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much. So you've said you absolutely rehearsed the business fundamentals, and you spoke a lot about talent and knowledge and skill. You said you make that welcome absolutely real and remind them that you're not kidding. This is the most welcoming place in the world. And then we love the way you use peer pressure to seal the deal, as it were. Mr. Mayor, we're going to come back in a few minutes to the question about how all Atlantans benefit from this. But I'd like to ask our other panelists a couple of questions first. So, Maria, you've heard what happens when the investors go to the mayor's office in Atlanta. So how does a city like Stockholm...
Actually, I can verify they are nice even to Swedes, because I've been there and it's a wonderful city.
Oh. Could be a bit of a bromance beginning to happen here. We're going to have to... So you've heard what some of the competition is doing. That's what the mayor says to the investors when they're in his office in Atlanta, and I bet very few of them walk out the door without signing the check. So what happens in Stockholm? How do you make the case for this northerly European city, this new global player that competing in this market that's becoming more and more competitive? What do you say to the investors, and what seals the deal?
First of all, you just don't say anything. You play Dancing Queen with ABBA and you make them dance.
Are we going to play it now?
Why not? And then you bring them out in the archipelago, and then the deal is almost done. No, Stockholm is, of course, Stockholm is a small player size-wise, but we're actually the fastest growing capital in Europe, population-wise. Looking at economic growth, we're actually one of few places in Europe, Sweden as a country, and Stockholm even more so, where you find higher growth rates than in the US. So Stockholm had almost Chinese growth figures last year. And we're punching above our weight economically. If you look at, and this is actually a feature we share with Atlanta. We're on the top 10 list of most multinational companies' headquarters. And the economy is already really global. We still face a lot of challenges in terms of globalization, so we have been happy to work with Amy and the Brookings team and JPMorgan Chase on an internationalization strategy to further go down that road. We're also a unicorn factory. The tech boom is very strong in Stockholm, and I know everybody says this. It's not a sort of unique pitch, but we actually are. We're home to the second strongest cluster of unicorns per capita after Silicon Valley. And third, and this is not unique, but it's very good from an economic standpoint and also from an investor's standpoint, we're not depending on one single industry or one big company. So the economy is robust and pretty resilient if we have an industry-specific shock. And then on a personal note, Stockholm has become, it has always has its beauty. It's a beautiful city built on islands, surrounded by water. it has always had that, but I moved to Stockholm in the late 1990s, and it has become a much more fun place. So it's sort of mentally, it's really a global big city. If you look at, entertainment, services, people's mentality, but logistically, it's more of a small town, and that combo is a pretty good value proposition.
So the combination of the capital city feel, the manageable small town environment, the technology specialization that you spoke about, and then the je ne sais quoi of the ABBA dancing queen. That's what does it.
That's it. You got it. You're smart.
Okay. So in a minute, we'll have a vote about whether you want dancing queen or southern hospitality, but we're not going to go there just yet. So thank you very much, Maria. General, welcome to the panel. It's a great honor to have you here as well. And of course, we've been speaking about the future of global cities, the competition, the increasing power and capability of these competitive mid-sized cities that we've been talking about. But of course, there's a bit of a cloud that looms over all of this, and that's the cloud of terrorism, insecurity, conflict, tension, and everything else. In your view, how big an issue is that for these global city issues?
Well, I think over the last 10 or 15 years, the globalization has changed how we need to look at economic development and security. It's becoming more and more complex every day. I call it the world is getting smaller. It's getting smaller because how fast information moves, access to information, what people think, perceptions, reality. Sometimes they get confused as you look around the world. So there's really two things that I would say. I believe that in any city today, whether it be in Asia, Europe, United States, Africa continent, wherever it might be, is that there's an inextricable link now in a relationship between economic development, political leadership, and security. And it's always been there, but it's more important today than it's ever been, and we can't forget that. So as you're looking at economic development, if you want to increase productivity of your employees, you've got to provide a safe and secure environment. If you want companies to come to your city, you have to convince them that it's a safe, secure environment for them to operate in and all their employees, and that's part of the solution. So you can no longer have a separate security plan, a separate economic development plan, or separate political goals. They got to be combined and work together. The second point I would make is that as we look to the future, all the statistics tell you, and we actually did a study in the Army about this before I left, is about we believe that by 2040 or 2050, 70% of the world's population is going to live in cities. So you're going to see a large migration into cities, which means you're going to have to think of how are you going to secure these cities as the amount of people that are coming in are growing. And then how do you relate that in increasing productivity, increasing educational opportunities, having social cohesion. All of these things add to improved security. So in my mind, they can't be separate. So when I come to a forum like this, I always would like to hear that one of the things we have to make sure is we maintain a safe and secure environment, and how are we going to do that in the future? Because the challenges are going to become greater. They're not going to become easier. And it might not necessarily be the security we're thinking about today. It could be cyber security, cyber protection and security. And so there's what we call, not the normal types of security you might have to provide. It's going to change. And so we have to be thinking ahead as we look at this. So I think in my mind, as I think about cities growing in the future, they have to have this connectivity together. And I'm sure the mayor does this all the time. I know he does in Atlanta. But it is a combination of international cooperation, federal and local cooperation as we move forward. And it's more important now than it's ever been.
General, thank you very much. Mr. Murray, I don't know if you want to comment on what the General's just said.
I mean, I don't think the General could be more accurate. The fact of the matter is, in November the 13th of last year, after the Paris attacks, the job of being a mayor has changed forever. So, I think I went from speaking to my police chief perhaps once or twice a week to speaking to my police chief every day. The fact that you're having 1,000 apps a week created that are encrypted end to end, is creating the kind of challenges for cities and for our federal partners that are almost unimaginable. And then the lone wolf aspect with hundreds of thousands of emails that are being sent in to cities just trying to identify some weak-minded, sick individual to encourage them to go out and act. We've had to reimagine so much of what cities do. So, for example, General, my SWAT team, the size of it has doubled. The number of individuals with long rifle capabilities has tripled. The training for that has been enhanced. In our airports now, we used to have our long rifles secured in a secure area of the airport. Now all of our individuals carry the long rifles, and the public has gotten comfortable with that. We're augmenting the FBI's capability because the FBI simply is not large enough to pursue the number of threats and do the interviews that are necessary when you hear these threats. And so I think the job of mayors around America and the world post-Paris has changed forever because the number of people who were killed in about 40 minutes. And so a SWAT team used to be designed for situations where individuals were hunkered down. So it would take a SWAT team 30 to 45 minutes to deploy. Well, now if you're a mayor, in 30 or 45 minutes, with someone who's simply trying to kill as many people as possible until they're stopped, that had to be rethought and reimagined. So not surprisingly, the general is absolutely right. But what I will tell you is it has radically changed the job of mayors so that if security was 10 to 15% of your portfolio, now it's absorbing 35% of your portfolio because we can't get it wrong one time. You add to that we have an airport that's responsible for 12 to 13% of domestic air travel in America. We handle 14 million more passengers than Beijing, just to give you an order of magnitude. Well, the general knows that the protocol for airport, when folks try to hijack planes, they're not trying to take them to another destination. They're not just trying to turn them right and turn them straight into cities. So all of these things have given me more gray hair than my wife appreciates. And were things, candidly, that when I ran for mayor in 2009 and got sworn in 2010, I never imagined that I would be dealing with every day. So.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. And General, thank you for your comments. Yeah. One of the things that you stressed, General, was that this is not just about better policing, better intelligence, better systems. It's also about economic inclusion. It's about social cohesion. Why is that so important?
Well, I think, as we watch both, if you look in Europe, they've had some significant social cohesion issues with Middle Eastern populations. And the impact that that's had because they have not been given the same economic development, they've not given the same education opportunities, they've kind of been alienated in their own neighborhoods, and so it causes then a potential backlash to the government. And you could, as you watch what's been going on in the United States here over the last several months, our problem might not be the same, but some of the characteristics are the same. We have to make sure that certain parts of our population continue to have the opportunities to be educated, have the opportunities for employment, increase their productivity. So it's not just heavy-handed security, it's a combination of all of these things. You've got to have a well-trained police capability, it's got to be synchronized with federal capabilities, but you also have to have programs within your city that enables you to reach out to these populations that then makes it a safer, more secure city, increases productivity, and makes it a more economically.
So I think part of what you're saying, General, and it's really come home in this last remark, is that the cost of economic exclusion, the cost of inequality, just got a whole lot greater.
Yeah.
Very.
Greg, this really is along the lines of we were just selected as one of the 100 resilient cities for the Rockefeller Foundation. This really is along that line of work. I mean, the word that we've been using is resiliency, but really it's de-siloing all of these aspects of your city and having a coordinated plan that really pulls it all together. And being a part of the Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities effort allows you really to partner with all of the cities that are a part of that conversation and come up to speed far faster than you could if you were starting from scratch.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
If I was giving advice to a mayor, I would, exactly what he just said, is that it's about the integration of all activities, and the only person who can do that is the mayor, probably working with the governor and probably working with the federal government in order to make this happen. And that's becoming, because of the complexities that we face, I go back to that. The world is just becoming more complex. It's not going to stop. You need to have, you no longer can get away with not having that integration.
And I think you probably need some distinguished generals around to help and advise. So. Andrew, I'm going to come back to you now. We're going to go for our second round of questions, and then we're going to be opening up for everyone in the room to participate. I want you to pick up the theme of public and private. You know, the idea of public and private partnerships has been around for a long time, but looking to the future and thinking about economic development in South Africa and Africa more generally, the other places that you know, how do you see public-private partnerships working together in the future? What's going to be really important in terms of delivering this more inclusive economy?
Well, let me pick up on the previous thread around issues of cities and security.
Yeah.
You know, we work with community safety partnerships, and that's both a growth issue. You can't have a business environment that's not safe for investors and customers and workforce and owners of property. But it's also very much an inclusion issue. Most of the violence in our city takes place in poor communities that are excluded from the economy and become self-perpetuating. So any good city leader of the future has to deal with complexity and has to be able to collaborate. You can't do these things unless you can work together. I think gone are the days where city leaders just run an administration. You've got to also help your partners deliver on their mandates in a collaborative way. That's the essence of partnering. You don't take it over. You maintain a very good division of labor, but you improve the performance of the ecosystem as a whole, whether it's the security ecosystem or the economic development ecosystem or the sustainability ecosystem. And as a mayor or as a city leader, as a business leader, you've got to be part of that system and improving the performance of that system, not just your own institution. You've got to think beyond the boundaries and the borders. I think it's useful also to try and get if we're taking a partnering approach quite consciously to progress cities into the future to deal with the complexities. And I mean, Greg, I think you if I read your last chapter of your new book, you talk about the ability to respond in the future to both negative and positive disruptors very quickly. And I would argue if you're not in a collaborative frame of mind, you're not going to be able to do either. I think it's not helpful to get everyone together into a big room and have endless discussions which generate wish lists of problems and shopping lists. That's disempowering. I think that the more focused partnering attempts and collaboration attempts are, and we certainly focus on two areas, it's issue-based or it's area-based. Who needs to work together to make this issue work, or who needs to work together to make this area be alive and part of the city? And you make it as specific as possible. I would also say that partnering like charity begins at home. So what do I mean by that? It means get your own house in order. You can't expect your partners to partner with you, whether it's business partners or community partners or academic partners, if you, let's say in the city government or in the public sector, haven't sorted out your silos, haven't sorted out your intergovernmental relations with state government or federal government, and haven't sorted out your ability to move beyond your own jurisdictions into functional regions as opposed to administrative and political regions.
Sure.
And then you can start building your cross-sector partnerships as well. And the final point I'd make, Greg, is you've got to look for the right people. Not everyone is automatically collaborative. There's a lot of command and control people out there.
We'll ask them in a minute who's who, don't worry.
And I think, the city leaders of the future will have good emotional intelligence, in other words, self-understanding. They'll have good social intelligence, knowledge of the other, and they will use those to have good systems relationship intelligence. In other words, understanding not just what their institution does and their people do, but how they work together in a system. And they will also be able to identify the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Wow.
Which are non-collaborative behaviors that undermine any system's approach. And that is combinations of blame, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt.
Wow. Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Let's give him a round of applause. So just to take your comment and see what our audience thinks before we ask the Mayor for his views on all of this, how many of you genuinely believe you work in organizations which are collaborative, or do you feel overall you work in organizations that are what we might call siloed? Those who work in organizations that are collaborative, let's see you. Thank you very much. Those who work in organizations that are siloed, let's see you. Okay, there's 1 or 2 bravely raising their hands. Thank you very much indeed. So, Andrew, I think you said, if I'm correct, partnerships will become more important, but generic partnerships is not where we're going. We're going to be focused very much on issues and places and how you make them work. And it's going to be about having collaborative people leading the efforts on all sides. And in order to make it work, you've got to deal with your own internal fragmentations as an organization. Great. Okay, Mr. Mayor, if we can, come to you now. So you gave us the fantastic pitch on what you say to investors about why they should come to Atlanta. How does Atlanta then translate this growth into inclusion? What is it that you're doing that makes this growth program that you described for us very compellingly, what is it that makes it work for all the Atlantans who I know you have at your heart?
Well, first of all, I think you have a moral obligation to make a demand when you have a high level of success. So it really all begins with a public conversation about saying many of the things that the general said about it's really in our interest to make sure that we really are getting as many people as possible into the boat. You know, I know a lot of people, I grew up in Atlanta, and I know a lot of people that I've known my whole life. I know very few people that begrudge me the success that I have. But what they do have a problem with is when they feel that they don't have a fair shot or a fair shake. And so I think that that ethic really does begin with the mayor and the top civic leadership. So on just yesterday, I stood in a room in one of the most challenged zip codes in the city of Atlanta with Muhtar Kent, the chairman of Coca-Cola and the chairman of Chick-fil-A. And we raised $7.5 million in 1 hour for that zip code for a place called City of Refuge, with a program that's focused on concrete results like job training, preparing people for skilled positions throughout the city, and we're going to do more and more of that. We have a group in Atlanta called the Atlanta Committee for Progress, which are our 25 biggest CEOs. And so we've really socialized this concept of inclusion so that it's not a fad, but it's something that is core to us. The second thing that I did was I created a cabinet-level member of my team who is a chief equity officer, whose job it is to challenge members of cabinet when we come in with proposals. Because what I saw was lacking was the voice for the people that the general was talking about. See, I know that when we have an economic development meeting, you know what their interest is, right? We're trying to get a deal done. I know what my police chief wants when he comes in the room. He's generally asking for more resources. I know what my public works commissioner is going to ask, but there isn't anyone, or there had not been an individual who was saying, what about these folks? Because you and I get looked after, right? The most vibrant parts of the city automatically get prioritized unless there's somebody raising their hand, making a demand. And so the example of the outcome for that is that we have a referendum for investment in infrastructure coming up in November, and we also have a referendum for the largest expansion of our public transit system in more than 30 years on the ballot in November. Because we had a person making a demand, those projects will be within 2 miles of 94% of the population of the city of Atlanta. And so here's what I believe. I believe all of us, anyone who is in a leadership position right now, needs to have a strong record on equity and inclusion, or you risk being turned out of office in a much shorter fashion than you ever would have in the past. And if you don't believe me, just ask the president of the University of Iowa or the head coach for the University of Iowa football team, with a young man engaged in a hunger strike and caused a ripple effect at a pace that's remarkable. So in July, after a shooting in Minnesota and in Baton Rouge, and then the awful killings in Texas, I came home to 10,000 protesters in my downtown, protesting something that happened in another city, being covered on all 3 cable channels. And we had less than 10 arrests, minimal property damage, and had civic protests that I think were very close to a national model. The reason that I think that it worked that way is because I actually engaged with the protesters, met with the civic activists, and when we got in alone in a room, I walked them through what we had been doing. So I wasn't making anything up. I said, you're concerned about our police. We had 1.6 million interactions with the police. Our officers fired their weapons less than 9 times. The Atlanta Police Department mirrors the racial composition of the city's population. We had already made the decision to go to body cameras for our police officers. We had already started bias training from our police officers. This is public safety, but the same is true in equity. When these events arise, you don't need to be talking about what I'm going to do in the future. You need to be talking about these are the things that we were already doing before the moment arose. And so in Atlanta, as the real estate market is coming back, our city is the biggest real estate holder in the city. So now that the market is coming back, I'm using our real estate through Invest Atlanta, through the Atlanta Beltline, through the Atlanta Housing Authority, and through the city's land bank to develop partnerships with developers so that we make sure we have inclusionary housing in a dynamic way, but not the old-fashioned inclusionary housing. So one example is we're doing a $100 million development in the heart of the city near Centennial Olympic Park, about 5 minutes from the headquarters of Coca-Cola. That project is about 440 units that will have rents between $3,000 to $4,000. But because of the city's investment, they're going to be 40 to 50 families that are living in that building for $1,000 a month. Not on the outskirts, but right in the heart of the city. So the point I'm making is that we have to all show concrete steps and a concrete program that is verifiable to achieve the objective that the general talked about. And I think that after that, you just put up the numbers. Last year, the city of Atlanta had the highest level of construction activity in the history of the city. So you don't get to poo-poo me as some soft, mushy liberal. I'm making an argument that these things we're doing together are creating a more dynamic, successful business environment. So guess what happens when we put up a bill at City Council that says if you use public resources or the tools that I have as mayor, you have to have affordable housing for working folks. 10 years ago, if I had put up that bill in Atlanta, I would have got destroyed by the development community. This time, they supported that bill. So I'm just trying to give you concrete results because I think that this issue is going to test all leaders. And I think the general absolutely nailed it. It's going to be the issue that we're grappling with, certainly for the next 10 and 20 years. And the last point I want to make is this. What we're really grappling with in cities is you have a workforce that's been doing the job of cities for decades. That generational solid job in public works or at the airport. And now everybody's moving to cities and they have a higher expectation, as you referenced in your question. So that means now I've got to bring in a different cadre of leaders, and I actually have to blend this new talent that is required to make the city run well, but I can't throw out or treat badly the people who've been doing the work, and that's the real cultural challenge that's going on. The good thing is that I believe that CEOs around the country and the world, if you look at the International Business Consortium at Davos, are coming to the sound conclusion that their time is better spent working with municipal leaders than you are working at national governments. That's the real treat. The real treat is if you want to do something with the 9th biggest metro in the US, in the 8th biggest state, you need me and 8 votes. That's an attractive deal. Right? If you come in my office and we shake hands and 8 people on city council out of 15 vote for it, we're a go.
Yeah.
And so I think that business has recognized that, and you're seeing a radical shift towards direct engagement with mayors that I think is far more efficient than attempting to continue to beat your head against the wall of national governments. So.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. I mean, there's so much in what you've just said, but a quick comment. You said that this is the big political issue of the next cycle. Inequality will not be tolerated by the electorate. You said organize the civic partners so you have a coalition for inclusion. You're not just doing it on your own. You said a chief equity officer is the way of institutionalizing the agenda within the city. You said deploy the city's balance sheet, its real estate, its planning, use its land, make it real that people are included in the city. And then you talked about the importance of demonstrating to everybody what you've actually done and achieved and keeping this agenda very high. And the last point you made was bring in the talent that can really integrate the agenda. So I wanted to summarize it because there's so much in what you said that I think was...
You sound so much better than me with that cool accent. I just love it. I listen to Greg all day.
It's what you said, Mr. Mayor, and I think it's a really profound set of statements, so thank you. Now, Maria, let's come to you. Stockholm has been known for many years as a very Swedish city, a Scandinavian capital, full of people, to be frank, who look like you.
Yeah.
But Stockholm is changing, isn't it?
It is.
Stockholm is becoming a city that's full of refugees and migrants and entrepreneurs and merchants and international students and people from every corner of the world. So how is Stockholm adjusting its traditional Swedish social democratic model to becoming this social global city and achieving economic inclusion, given everything you told us about your growth agenda?
First of all, I just must say it's so inspiring to listening to the mayor, so thank you. And I totally agree. Within 5 years' time, we'll see more mayors than prime ministers in Davos, for example, and mayors are definitely the new prime ministers. That being said, back to your question about the influx of refugees to Sweden, you might not know that, or you do, but Sweden, together with Germany, are the 2 countries in Europe that have taken most refugees the last few years. But the story is actually bigger than that because Sweden, historically a small, northern, very, very homogeneous country with people looking like me, coming from the Vikings, has actually turned into a country of the last 2-3 decades that is, as if you just look at the data and stats, as diverse as the United States of America. And that is because an influx of refugees. And we've had a high number of refugees for many years now. But last year, something quite dramatic happened. We had 160,000 asylum seekers to Sweden. And the highest number before last year was 1992 or 1993, and we had 80,000, and that is enormous. Maybe the last 5 years, we've had 30, 40,000 on average, which are high numbers. But last year, we had 160,000 coming to Sweden. And Stockholm is one of the labor markets that is best equipped to actually integrate refugees and immigrants generally, because we have this high growth. But we're facing a severe challenge, and that challenge has already been mentioned earlier here during the presentation. As many global cities, the housing market is up. It's super expensive. And in addition to that, we have a little Swedish feature. We have a super regulated rental market. So the rental market is dysfunctional, to say the least. So the labor market that is most well equipped to actually integrate people cannot handle the housing situation. So what happens is that a lot of refugees, they don't end up in Stockholm. They end up at the countryside where the labor markets are not as dynamic as
But the
in
housing
Stockholm.
markets are more accessible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that is what happens. So this is a severe challenge, and we don't have the answers yet. But the last part of your question was about sort of this. I think you were alluding to this not only U.S. but international picture of Sweden as being this sort of social democratic utopia. Exactly.
Yeah.
But
it's not.
Except for the music.
I would like to say a few things that is important if you are to understand Sweden generally, the Swedish economy, but also because I firmly believe that we will be able to deal with this issue. We're not quite there yet, but we will handle it. The first thing I want to say is that the 70s is over. Sweden is one of the countries in the Western world that has reformed and transformed the most since the late 80s and the early 1990s. It's a tremendous journey, and that has been going on both under social democratic and center-right governments, and we've had both the last 20 years. Before, we only had social democrats. So Sweden has become a much more competitive country generally, and I saw one of these indexes that came out yesterday, and we're the 6th most competitive economy in the world, and that is because we have been able to continuously reinvent the Swedish model, and that has been embraced by people on both sides of the political aisle. So you have to understand that journey. Lastly, we did a project. We have done a project together with LinkedIn and my organization's members, which are the business community in Sweden, big and small companies. And we called it Welcome Talent. And we used LinkedIn's platform to match newly arrived refugees with internships within the business community. And we want to develop those kinds of tools further. And what we see is that companies like LinkedIn, they are more well-equipped to deal with the matching issue compared to our traditional state or national agencies.
Maria, thank you very much indeed. Again, you've made a number of points there. You've said overall you're optimistic about your ability to accommodate this big social change because of the adaptability of Sweden these days, your capacity to use new technologies. But you also said the key thing you've got to overcome is these rigidities in the housing market. That's going to be key for your labour market participation. So we might come back to that in a minute. General, I'm going to pitch you the last question, and then I'm going to try to get our friends involved. Earlier on, you spoke very seriously and soberly about extremism and terrorism. You talked about the challenge of security. You mentioned in your final comments cybersecurity. I just want to ask you to tell us a little bit about what's coming. What are the other things that city leaders need to be aware of or concerned about in this area of security and risk?
Well, I think the number one challenge is how policing, no matter where you live in the world, is changing. As I've had a chance to be in a lot of different places around the world, most of them tend to be places that weren't the nicest places in the world. But I would tell you the difference between successful and unsuccessful cities is the policing and the ability to police. And I think the dynamic of how you police, and I'm not just talking about police on the street, I'm talking about protecting yourselves from a cyber attack, protecting yourselves and changing how policing is done because the threats are changing and they're becoming what we call asymmetrical. The threats that you face are more asymmetrical than they used to be. They're not just the common threats. And so you have to have a capability that allows you to deal with these asymmetric. Actually, the mayor talked how he's dealing with some of the asymmetric threats that he's facing. And so that's going to continue. And technology is proliferating much quicker than it used to. So in my mind, a successful security operation could be not so much that you have a technological advantage, but how do you use the technology and how you've come up with more creative, innovative ways to use that in order to provide better protection for your population. So I think that's how we have to think as we move to the future. And again, we have to make sure that everyone is thinking in some level about security. And there's got to be a private partnership in security as well, a private-public partnership. And how do cities build partnerships with major corporations and other large organizations within their cities and coordinate security efforts? We have to do it at the federal level, but we also have to do it at the local level, where we're cooperating. We used to live in an environment where nobody would share information. If I had information, I'd keep it as close to my chest as possible. I didn't want it, mostly the government, we wouldn't want to share it with anybody. I think because of the challenges we face, we must be more collaborative with our local officials and also our large public institutions and private institutions in sharing this information, because that will better enable us to collaborate to provide a security environment that will be successful in the future.
General, thank you very much indeed. You've made the point very clearly that sound policing is absolutely at the heart of it. But I think you've said sound policing is not enough on its own.
Right.
You need flexibility, you need to anticipate problems, you need resilience, as the mayor was saying, and you need partnership. Let's open it up now. I think we've got 2 minutes to go. 2 questions. I thought we had 5 minutes, but there we go. 2 questions. So who would like to ask the General, the Mayor, Maria, or Andrew a question? Don't be shy. I think it's Mark at the back. And if we could have one other person as well, that would be great.
I just want to direct this to Mayor Reed. I'm just curious, you've made some incredible statements today to listen to you as a city civic leader, sort of talk about your role, talk about the times we're living in right now. One thing I'm just curious if you could take just 1 minute more is the role that you see businesses playing. You talked about the economics of your city and the work that you're doing, but when you talked about equity and inclusion and sort of what's happening, what role do you see businesses or business groups being able to play in supporting a civic leader like you with that agenda?
The relationship between city leaders and the business community needs to be seamless. It needs to be authentic, and it needs to be very comfortable, because cities are going to need a level of expertise that we don't have on our bench. And businesses typically have that expertise. So increasingly, we're going to need assistance as we have more and more people move into cities, to take on responsibilities and do things better than we have before, because the people who are moving into cities are more demanding. So they're demanding better services at a faster rate. And candidly, cities typically aren't in the habit of changing that fast. So whether it's access to technology, whether it's the way that we're doing something. So we're in the middle of rolling out a $250 million bond program. I have an oversight board of CEOs who are used to managing large capital projects. Well, guess what happens? They bring all their team at no cost to the city to scrutinize my capital program, which means we're doing a better job of deploying that $250 million in capital. So I think mayors of the future have to make sure that that relationship is a seamless one. And guess what else happened? Business people talk to their friends and say, this city's got their act together. And so it starts to generate greater business inclusion and more opportunities for others. And when you have a hard moment, the call between you and that CEO is a comfortable call.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much indeed. Now, we were waiting for one more question from you, but as that hasn't come yet, I'm going to ask you a question. At the start of this debate, I asked you whether the challenges that cities were going to face were getting greater and the expectations were getting greater. You said they were. I asked you if you thought that cities were acquiring the capabilities that they need to deal with those challenges. You weren't sure. How many of you now are feeling optimistic about the ability of cities to cope with the challenges that are coming, and how many are feeling less optimistic? Who's feeling optimistic? Who's feeling not optimistic about that? Okay, so we've got it down to about 80 to 20, which means we've made an improvement of about 25% on where we were before the panel occurred. I don't see another question coming, so in a minute, Amy Lou will come back to the stage to close the session. But let me ask you to join me, if you will, in thanking, firstly, the Honourable Cassie Reed, the Mayor of Atlanta, General Raymond Odierno, former Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, Andrew Bahrain, and Maria Ranka. Panel, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Greg.